This story begins with one forbidden city, which was the imperial palace of the Ming dynasty. In fact, the Kenboken Palace was originally planned to be the largest and most magnificent building in the country because the emperor himself lived there. However, things didn't turn out as guessed, and Cheongsingun Palace was much more magnificent and grand than that. And this could only mean that its owner stood higher in status than the emperor of the Ming Empire himself. The owner of this magnificent palace, Cheongsingun, is Jin Yu-sung, an absolute warrior who possesses incredible strength. It was he who sat all alone in his palace, and he was very bored. The man did not know what to do to occupy himself. In fact, his whole life consists of nothing but martial arts, and he doesn't even know what other things to do. Jin Yu got up from the bed at this moment and thought that he shouldn't have given away or else the position at all, and needed to do completely different things. But then the guy realized that he shouldn't even have come into this world in the first place. He shouted it very loudly because his emotions were running high. At that time, one of the assistants came to him and told the Lord that the servants could actually hear him. However, Jin Yu didn't care about that and irritably asked, "Is he not allowed to speak out now?" This assistant leader in the palace was Ju Zhong, and he replied in a calm voice that a gentleman should be able to restrain himself and his body. However, the man was infuriated by this and asked, "Is he really going to scold him again now?" And afterward he looked at him enigmatically and asked, "Is he really standing behind to protect him?" The assistant replied that it was absolutely correct. Hearing these words, Jin Yu laughed and asked where it was even seen that a tiger was protecting a dragon. He started mocking Ju Chong and used his powers to fly over him, asking him if he could do that. The aide did not lose his temper and said that he knew he was much weaker than he was. However, in an emergency, he would be willing to sacrifice his life for him. The master, hearing this, was very much surprised and asked, "Is he in danger? He certainly doesn't need it now. He is not ready for all this." Jin Yu, after thinking for a while, asked why no one was attacking him. A secret force that lurks in the darkness and wants to overthrow Cheongsingun, for example. Or, for example, some foreigners who want to take over his land, instead of barbarically breaking into his territory and destroying everything around him. Or, for example, someone will commit treason, but for selfish motives. The master was immersed in his own ideas. However, the aide said that all the elders who were plotting were finished. His subordinates are already investigating the foreign invasion. Everything has already been decided in advance. Ju Zhong became serious and said that if he knew that the elders were up to something again, he would kill them immediately. However, the boy was surprised and asked why he should kill them, since the elders wouldn't live long in this world anyway. However, the assistant stood his ground and said that if the elders were suddenly displeased with him, he would definitely kill them all. Jin Yu was even afraid of such words, so he asked him to stop saying such things. However, the aide did not stop and said that in that case they would attach a special surveillance team to protect him. The gentleman, however, did not like it. He thought, watching from the sidelines, that it was just awful. However, at this moment, their conversation was interrupted by some rustling near the door. Jin Yu immediately heard it. He grabs his weapon and says someone is at the front door. He feels their energy and really hopes, boy, it's an assassin. Then he turned to the darkness and told them to come in. Boy, is he ready for a fight. However, his assistant asked in surprise, what kind of real killer would enter through the main door? It would give him away immediately, wouldn't it? However, the gentleman said that no one knows for sure. Perhaps this person is very clever. So I decided to use an unconventional move. And at that very second, the door opened, and a heavenly palace counselor appeared in front of them. He began to shout something. After that, he fell to his knees in front of the Lord. This man's name was San Lin, and he said in a sentence like this that he wanted to spread his divine teachings to hundreds of millions of lives under the sky, and no one would be able to resist his will. Jin Yu was disappointed when he saw it and said that he had already asked him never to do it again after all. Sang Lin didn't remark anything on this, and he was starting to get nervous, so he just stared at the master. Jin Yu asked if he dared to be impertinent to him now. The guy immediately said that there was nothing wrong at all, he didn't mean it, and the master asked who then allowed him to raise his head. Sang Lin immediately put it down and said that he deserved to die, asking for forgiveness. Jin Yu laughed and asked if he really wanted him to kill him. The man, like a loyal servant, said that of course he should kill him. The master activated his abilities and said with a smile, in which case they wouldn't hesitate, or he was just messing with him right now. The palace counselor immediately said that in no way was he mocking. Jin Yu calmed down a little and changed the subject, saying that it took more than 2 years, and asked how the people in the western region were doing. Sang Lin had heard that firearms had been invented in the West. They were superior to those in the Ming dynasty, and while the Central Plains practiced martial arts, there were people in the West who called themselves mages and practiced magical arts. And Jin Yu, after listening to this, said that he was actually more interested in their strength, and also added that if they were a threat, should he consider protecting the people. Lord liked it all, and said that if they were stronger, then there would be war, and he thought there would be no other choice in such a case. Sang Lin was very worried, but said in a trembling voice that definitely, but they are in the West after all, and it is somehow inconvenient. Jin Yu, hearing this, thought for a moment and said that it was indeed a bit far away. Then he asked irritably why he hadn't told him about it right away. The palace counselor didn't know what to say, so he remained silent for a while. Then an aide spoke up and explained that the leader wanted him to speak informally and clearly on the facts. Sang Lin remained silent for a while, searching for words. After that he shouted, saying that this was a hell of a thing. This phrase was said very loudly, so there was silence in the room for a while, everyone thinking over the information they had received. Jin Yu then sighed and asked if they had managed to subdue 70% of the leaders of the magic faction. After all, he had asked them not to have random fights. Sang Lin, justifying their actions, said that they were using a very evil dark power, and certainly as far as possible, they refrained from bloodshed. The master was surprised and asked if they were so weak. The counselor replied that their abilities were excellent. However, it seemed that their magic had turned into some kind of skill rather than a normal technique. It was something like summoning thunder rain or communicating over long distances. Jin Yu didn't like it, so he turned away and went back to his bed. At that moment, however, the counselor presented him with a book and some crystal, telling the Lord to take this. The man was immediately interested in what he saw and asked what it even was. Sang Lin said that the head of the Western region mage faction gave it to him, and the mages said that their ultimate goal was alchemy. They also say that alchemy is a technique that combines lower-level materials to create higher-level materials. For example, they can make gold from stones. Jin Yu was surprised and asked, "Isn't that what the crooks on the streets usually do?" However, the counselor said that it was not at all, because it was real knowledge. He repeated the words that their ultimate goal was alchemy, and that could only mean that they would have a chance to enter the new world. That book he had given him also described the method of using alchemy. Jin Yu immediately began to scrutinize the book. He was curious about how one could enter the new world. Ju Chen, who had been standing by the side all this time, asked if maybe this was just an ordinary tale of some kind, and there were no secrets there. Sang Lin bowed and said that a delegation of mages had arrived with them, so one could easily ask them. After a while, a representative of the mages in the West, a kid named Mulder, was brought into their room. The gentleman immediately inquired if anything could be done at all with this book, for he did not yet understand anything. Mulder bowed and said that purely theoretically anything was possible, but in practice it was quite difficult to realize. Jin Yu, hearing him speak, was very surprised and wondered how he was able to learn his language so quickly. The representative of the mages explained that it was one of the new skills that allowed them foreigners to learn languages quickly. The master smiled and said that they were indeed ahead of them. Apparently they were already losing to them. Mulder began to scrutinize him and thought he had truly incredible magical powers. Many vivid colors and auras that emanated from Jin Yu unfolded in front of him. He still couldn't believe that such power was lurking within one person. However, at that moment, his musings were interrupted by the voice of a gentleman who asked why it would be difficult to implement after all. "What is the problem?" Mulder explained that there was no power to activate the gate. When he saw the gentleman's surprised face, however, he realized that he hadn't explained everything to him yet. The man said that Vratan in the Ming Dynasty language means the gate of pleasure, and he could think of energy as a life force. Jin Yu began to ponder his words and said that in that case, if this energy was there, then there was no problem. Mulder didn't much understand what he was talking about. Then the gentleman turned to the deputy and asked if he remembered the woman. He was referring to the woman who seduces men and absorbs their life energy. Her name is Man-Ju. Master, when he first thought of her, his heart immediately began to beat more frequently, and he asked the assistant if he might call her to dinner, and now go and dress up for such an occasion. However, at this moment, Ju Chong irritably asked him to focus on the case and not get distracted. Jin Yu immediately stopped thinking about it. He said that he had actually made a habit of it, and after that, he asked if energy was needed after all. Mulder agreed with him. Then the man asked why on earth they would even hand over a piece of equipment that wasn't even a fact that worked. He'd even heard that in the West it was very valuable to them. The magician's representative replied that, in fact, there was more, according to records that were made over 100 years ago. The triplets once tried to open this very gate. Some say that they combined their magical energy and were able to open the gate, even if only halfway. The total amount of energy that was needed for the discovery can be obtained when several magicians with the same energy get together. The problem, however, is that the nature of the power is different for everyone. Jin Yu asked if it was because they weren't a perfect match. Mulder said that it was absolutely right. If the 5 great magicians existed, he thought it might well be possible. In fact, a huge amount of magical power was needed to open this very gate, and it had to be of the same type. When the Lord heard all this, he began to think carefully. And after a while he smiled happily, for after all the thought had come to him that was supposed to. He turned to Ju Chong and asked that he take the men out, for there was no one left in the neighborhood. After a while, when the assistant had carried out the master's orders, Jin Yu used his ability to check if there was anyone left in the area. When he saw no one, he said that it was just him and a representative of the mages in the place now. Mulder, seeing this, was very surprised. He couldn't figure out if the master had really checked everything for people now. To him, this was something unbelievable. But then, Jin Yu looked at him carefully and said that it was time to start. The representative of the mages became nervous and realized that he really wasn't joking. He tried to calm himself, to keep his voice from shaking, and then he agreed and said it was okay to start. Jin Yu told him to watch carefully, for this was all the energy he had, and at that moment he activated his abilities. A bright turquoise fire appeared around the gentleman. His pupils were also the same color. The whole room filled with an incredible amount of energy. Mulder was shocked by what he saw, because the energy was really quite strong. He didn't understand how one person could even have so much magical power. A normal person's whole body would just burst if it was stored in him. After a while, Jin Yu spoke up and said that he felt uncomfortable for a while. With that strength, however, he later got used to it. Moreover, his energy doesn't naturally evaporate. It's because of the binding force that binds him. So he has to compress it well and hide it in his body. Otherwise, people would simply die while being around him. At this moment, Jin Yu became very large because of his amount of strength. For a while longer, he demonstrated his abilities. After that, they began to subside. When the master took his natural form, he asked, "Do they have so much energy to open this gate?" Mulder couldn't even stand on his feet from shock. He sat on the floor and now realized before that energy had been released, it was just a remnant of the power that had been used to open the gate. He thought it was such a waste to use her just to show him the guy. He couldn't even hold back his emotions, tears streaming down his cheeks. Then the representative of the mages bowed before the master and said that he understood him, calling him master. Jin Yu was very surprised and asked, "Since when did he become a master? And why is he suddenly bowing his head to him?" He had heard that magic didn't bow to anyone. Mulder cried and said he actually wanted to dedicate himself to the palace of the heavenly demon. When the Lord heard this, you were very surprised and asked why he suddenly made such a decision. The representative of the mages said that, in fact, he had no choice, and asked if it wasn't obvious where he got such power and strength from. Jin Yu, hearing all this, got very angry. He asked who the leader was, let him go to him, and don't come back. At that moment, Mulder raised his whole crying face and looked at the Lord. He wanted to say something to him. However, he was very surprised because the place where Jin Yu had just sat was empty. The boy realized that he had disappeared. The mage representative couldn't believe that this was the very same teleportation and incredible speed. A whole year had passed since then. Jin Yu was looking at some crystal that was glowing very brightly. He asked Mulder, "Are those really the gates?" The guy replied, "That's right. They were created by magic and the magical society." The master at this point touched this crystal and said that it was just a gemstone. How could it be a gate? However, the mage representative said in a calm voice that he just couldn't see it, but there was a huge altar built in the ground. Jin Yu. The longer he looked at the stone, the stranger his feelings were. The guy said that he could definitely feel a strange energy from it. Right now, it was still unclear what it was. He then calmed down and said it sounded interesting enough, and asked if he could check it out to see how it worked. Mulder replied that certainly he could do it. Just have him pour his energy into it evenly and not rush into anything. The master agreed. He then put his hand on the stone, saying that it could be dangerous, so let them stay away from it. When everyone had withdrawn, he began to gradually pour his energy directly into this portal stone. This sight was incredibly beautiful and quite powerful, for Jin Yu's energy was the greatest. Everything around was glowing with bright lights. The guy kept pouring his energy into it. He thought it was incredible, because he was putting so much effort into it. It would not crumble or crack, even if it took millions of years to do so. That delighted the master. However, still, such a gemstone's ability hurt his pride, and at this point, he decided to put in even more effort, and began to infuse his energy much faster than necessary. The people who were standing around started screaming. Some of them told them to use a shield so they wouldn't get hurt. People could not believe that it took such a powerful energy to open this portal. However, at that moment, something began to happen to the crystal. Cracks suddenly began to appear on it, with bright light pouring out of them and getting bigger and bigger. And so, after a while, it split into small pieces and threw a lot of its energy into the sky. Everything around was very brightly illuminated from this portal. It didn't last long, however, and soon the light stopped. The people who were holding their shield at this time stopped and surprisingly began to stare directly at the spot where the crystal had been a while ago. Everyone was surprised. After all, they had succeeded and the gate opened. They immediately began to greet the master and thank him. The mage representative shouted joyfully, telling the Lord that he had managed to open the gates of the new world. It had been quite some time since the portal had been opened, and the sun had already begun to go below the horizon. Jin Yu and his assistant were still standing at the distribution table when Sang Lin walked up to them with his collected items and said that he would go first. The master was surprised and asked why exactly he wanted to do this. The counselor replied that he was sure, for sure, that there were other civilizations. Jin Yu nodded, said that it could be very dangerous outside the gate nonetheless, and asked if they could just find someone else to explore this new world. Sang Lin laughed and said that it had been a long time since he had been to the West, and now he was very bored, so he wanted to go there. The master was surprised and asked, "Is he really willing to risk his life just for that?" The counselor replied that of course he would go and find out about the world first. And if something dangerous does happen, the Lord will just take him and save him. He's sure of it because that's the way it's always been. Jin Yu smiled and said that definitely everything would be fine. Sang Lin, since he didn't abuse his power, the members of the heavenly demon palace respect him. The counselor is one of the three leaders who were together with Gu until the end. The counselor entered that gate without any hesitation, and when the master saw his back, he thought he would return home safely. However, even after 10 years, there was no word from Sang Lin, and he never returned. The palace members definitely tried to go after him. However, Jin Yu strictly forbade them from doing so. If it was really dangerous, then the people below would have nothing to do there. The guy thought it was all meaningless. Since Sang Lin had left without a trace, another 80 years of his life had been wasted. Jin Yu sat with a bottle of alcohol near an empty grave and turned to Sang Lin and asked him if he remembered the times when they were together and fought, laughed, and even cried. He said that he had no urgent business to attend to, for everyone had left him long ago. The man was desperate. He was drinking alcohol and said that now he was all alone, which made him very lonely. And what pleasure could he get from being alone anyway? When he had drunk the contents of the bottle, he tossed it aside and said that there was at least something good after all, namely, that the number of tombstones was no longer increasing. At this point, he walked over to the portal that was still open and thought he would need to create his own tombstone. It will not disappear, and perhaps there will only be some legends about it, such as the immortal warrior going into the sky and not returning. And on that very day, the heavenly demon palace lost its owner, who entered that very portal out of desperation. Jin Yu, when he entered the portal, he came out in Seoul Station, which is located in South Korea. All the people who passed by him were surprised. They did not understand what kind of person he was and why he was dressed so strangely, so they looked at him in surprise. Jin Yu looked around and was very surprised. In fact, he thought that the new world was quite interesting. But suddenly, a strange scent wafted to him. He didn't know what it was, so he immediately covered his nose with his sleeve so that he wouldn't hear the horrible smell. He looked around and wondered if there was any place in this world where he could rest. He decided to go to a place where there would be more people's energy. After a while, he came to the train station itself, which was quite crowded, some even sleeping on benches. These were the people who had been less fortunate in this life. Jin Yu looked around and thought that this guest house was indeed gorgeous and even so spacious. For him, this was the best place he could find. At that moment, the people who were sleeping in that place began to scrutinize the stranger. They did not understand who he was. Jin Yu stopped next to the food vending machines and thought that it had been quite some time since he had received so many wary looks before he became the leader of the heavenly palace. At that moment, however, his musings were interrupted by men who came over and sat down beside him. They were sloppily dressed and didn't even smell right anymore. The stranger started to say something to him, however. Jin Yu, of course, didn't know their language, so he didn't understand what it was he wanted from him. The boy didn't understand a word, so it made him a little wary. He began to think how he could get out of this situation. At that moment, however, he remembered the first time he had met a representative of the mages. The latter had said that they had a special opportunity to learn new languages. Jin Yu decided that he was going to try this language acquisition trick that Mulder had taught him. And that's when he activated this ability. The man looked at the stranger carefully, trying to learn his language. Various words immediately began to appear in Jin Yun's mind. After a while, he finally began to understand what they were going to say. So he turned to them, introduced himself, and said that he could continue. However, he didn't answer anything. He just looked at Jin Yun in surprise. Then the guy got angry and asked what was the matter, why he was ignoring him. Then the stranger spoke up and said that his dialect was much better and asked where he had come from. In fact, the man was puzzled. Jin Yu scratched his ear and said that he came from Korea. The stranger said that it was probably the name of a state, but then decided not to dwell on the topic too much and asked him what was up. The guy replied that it wasn't really a big deal. He just needed a place to sleep. The stranger walked up to him and laughed, saying that he were very much alike after all. He introduced himself, saying his name was Ken J. Kwan, but asked to be called just Hen Kwan. Jin Yu said that he came to this place through the gate to check what this new world was like. However, it had been a long time since someone like him had come to this place. About 100 years had already passed by now. He also said that this guy was skilled in martial arts. The stranger at this point wondered what else he was saying. What new world? What martial arts? He thought that this stranger was more like a homeless young guy who had gone completely crazy. After a while, they approached the other men, who were sitting off to the side drinking something from their bottles. Hyun Kwan approached them and asked, turning to Mr. Kim, if there were any more seats. Everyone immediately looked at the newcomers, and Mr. Kim replied that there were definitely seats. However, he did not understand why they were needed. The boy said that this strange kid had no place to sleep. However, Mr. Kwan was surprised and asked him what of it. Hyun Kwan gestured at the stranger and said in a whisper that he was a little crazy. Kwan then wondered if they should just take him to the police station and be done with it. Jin Yu began to scrutinize these guys and wondered if he should use magic on them. However, if he could read their minds, he would quickly find common ground. At that moment, Mr. Kwan gestured to the empty seat beside him and said that indeed they should help each other. He turned to Jin Yu and told him to sit next to him. The guy bowed, thanking them, and Hyun Kwan was very surprised at this moment. After all, he spoke a different language. He also said that he thought they were fellow countrymen, but apparently he had been deceived all this time. The guy looked at him carefully and said that from what he said he was swarming here and there, and if he made a fuss about it, they'd kick him right out of their territory. Hyun Kwan turned around and started to walk away, saying that he's so unlucky. He doesn't even know what to do about it. However, Mr. Kwan turned to Jin Yu at this moment, telling him to ignore him and sit down next to them. The boy of words thanked the stranger, sitting down next to him. However, at that moment he suddenly felt uncomfortable. When he saw that he felt sick, he asked what was wrong. Did he have a headache? Jin Yu said he was fine. He just felt dizzy for a moment. In fact, even the best mages could only use magic for 2. It was quite difficult to recognize the thoughts of 5 people at the same time. However, it wasn't actually the dizziness that was the problem, but his ki. On the way to this place, he had used up quite a lot of strength. At this moment, Jin Yu remembered that he had met some stranger at the gate who said that he would see if they could close the door. He didn't know who it was, but it was a rather unpleasant being. At that moment, a guy turned to him and said his name was In Chang Kim and asked him what his name was. Jin Yu was about to say his name, but he realized that his real name couldn't be said to strangers, so he decided to come up with something more complicated. He said his name was Wang Jiyu. The guy said it sounded a lot like a Chinese name and also asked how old he was. Jin Yu replied that he hadn't really counted since he turned 100. In Chan was very surprised and asked if he was serious about saying that now. The man said that it certainly sounded silly, but it was actually true. At this point, the stranger thought he was a nice guy, but he felt sorry for him. He gave him a glass and asked him if he was drinking. At that moment, he began to pour the contents of the bottle. Jin Yu, after drinking the glass, replied that it had actually been a long time since he had had a drink. However, as soon as his lips touched the liquid, a very strange feeling came over him. He was immediately twisted and spit out what he had drunk a second ago. In fact, it was the first time he had ever drunk something so incredible. The people sitting around him didn't understand what was happening to him. Jin Yu, holding the glass tightly in his hand, asked, "Is there any drink better than this?" In Chan was very surprised and asked what he was saying. After all, it's the cheapest option of all. It's exactly what poor people like them drink. Jin Yu, after pondering his words, asked, "Does this mean that if one has money, one can kill alcohol even better?" Then he immediately inquired, "How can one make that money?" The man who sat next to him asked, "Does he really think they themselves know how? After all, if they knew the secret, they wouldn't be sitting here." But even then, another suddenly spoke up. He was bald and turned to Jin Yu and said that if he wanted to make money and get rich easily, the best way was to enter the gate and awaken. Then another spoke up and said that actually a guy at Yensan Station had actually had an awakening some time ago. Now he's introducing very many different machines of expensive brands. Then the other asked what they were waiting for at the moment. "The special branch is mopping up the gate and we need to hurry." The stranger who was sitting next to Ji Yu said that they were just idiots. and asked when guys like them would get the chance. What if the government ends up just taking all the resources? GU was surprised and asked, "Are there really these gates in this world as well?" The homeless woman replied that there were actually quite a few. The boy immediately asked, "Who opened them then?" However, the man replied that he did not know, and no one knew that in principle. GU thought at this moment that if he was only able to open one gate, then who was able to open several gates at once? This was very suspicious. In-chan turned to him and asked him what he was doing, since he doesn't know what's going on in the world at all. At least he remembers where he used to live before he came to this place. At this moment, he started pouring him the next glass of alcohol. Jinyu said that he actually had quite a long story to tell. However, the guy added that they had nowhere to rush, so he could tell everything. Jinyu drank the contents of the glass and said that in that case, he would tell them everything. Then the boy began to tell his story, and he said he was the Prince of Kori. Actually, Kori is a state on the Korean peninsula. Because he was the youngest, he was quite far from following the throne, and because he had great respect for his brother, he lived his life without any dissatisfaction. However, at some point, the soldiers revolted and seized the royal throne, killing many people along the way. Jinyu said that he was the only one from the royal family who was able to cross the Ming dynasty border with the help of his servants. However, he was then captured and sold into slavery to mountain arsonists. He, of course, does not know whether it was luck or bad luck. However, the Ming dynasty was under the attack of a demonic cult. This situation forced the orthodox and evil factions to join forces, and the place he was sold to was a secret organization called the Destruction Squad. He was raised from him to be a killing tool to put an end to the demonic cult. Thus, he became the strongest warrior of all. However, the real problem actually arose a few years later. The demon cult disintegrated after its leader suddenly died. Therefore, the absurd ending came because the demon cult no longer existed. The tools that were created to destroy them had to be destroyed. However, they decided to dispose of them to avoid a sudden revolt, but the guns did not accept death. Out of 13 combat hours, only a few managed to survive the fight. They struggled and fought repeatedly to survive. However, only 3 lasted to the end. They included Sang Lin, Jin Yu-sung, who gave his fake name, and Ju Jung. And just like that, the 3 of them promised revenge. They managed to subdue the remnants of the demonic cult and make their goal a reality after all. Jin Yu ended by saying that that was when the Heavenly Demon Palace was born, which would be ruled by the Ming dynasty in the future. In fact, he was sure they were all so moved that they didn't even know what to say. However, at that moment, the homeless looked at him angrily and asked if he really meant it. Many felt as if they had just listened to some fairy tale or the words of a madman. Jin Yu, raising his glass up, said that he shouldn't say it so easily. After all, he had been through a lot. However, it was then that one of the bailiffs came closer to him and asked him what was next. What was the flavor of it in the first place? He had read martial arts magazines before, but he had never heard a story like this. He liked the story so much that he started asking the guy if they had avenged their honor and dignity, and how much effort the protagonist had expended. Jin Yu was very angry at this moment. He started yelling at them, telling them to stop bullying, because this was a real fight for survival. Then one of the homeless men suddenly reached into his bag and said that he liked the saju. It was valuable supplies. However, he could share it with him. And at the same moment, Tut pulled out a few cans, saying that this was just the perfect drink in terms of martial arts. It was yin and yang combined, even more delicious to taste. The guy handed him bottles of alcohol and asked him to tell them the continuation of this exciting story. Jin Yu thought about his proposal. However, he still didn't accept their gift. At this moment, the homeless people started mixing drinks in the same glass. Yes, the boy got a whiff of that wonderful aroma. He was glowing with joy that he would have such an opportunity to try this drink. Then he suddenly shouted out that it was quite a rare drink, and it also had a large amount of various energies in it. That drink was really glowing. Then the homeless man shouted, calling himself an idiot, and asked if he had done everything right. His friend shielded himself from this bright light and said that apparently he was a little too much after all. asking if this was the gateway to heaven. The entire train station was already engulfed by this bright light, and people didn't realize what was happening. However, Jinyu was completely calm, and at that moment, everything suddenly changed. It was as if they were in some other world. Various crystals were flying across the sky, and the surroundings were of delicate colors. Jinyu looked around and was very surprised and asked what was going on, why everyone who was around him immediately disappeared. He realized that this was some kind of artificial plane, for he couldn't feel the natural energy. At that moment, the people who were at the station, with terror in their eyes, began to look around. They didn't understand what was happening and where they were. One of them asked if this was the real gate. Another man, however, replied that it simply could not be. There is clearly something wrong. Suddenly, one of the homeless men looked up and saw a silhouette of a man. He immediately called out to the other people and told them to look up, because there was something strange up there. The people immediately looked up and saw a strange silhouette. They began to shout that there was someone there, but they did not realize what it was, for they could not see it. Jinyu also raised his head upwards. He thought after seeing this incomprehensible silhouette, is this some kind of levitation? However, at that moment, a voice spoke. He said that he was insanely happy to see them, and also said that he was the administrator who would accompany them. He looked at all these people and said that they had actually been chosen as gate participants, adding to accept their sincere congratulations. At this very time, in the Control and Regulation Office of the Soul Branch, people were doing their work as usual and making sure everything was in order. Suddenly, the commander came in and told them to report all the numbers. People started to develop different areas of the cities and said that there were no anomalies. This man was a supervisor named Han Ji-Hu. People kept saying that there were no anomalies. However, at that moment, one of the workers saw something strange. He immediately called the commander because he suddenly had a window pop up on his screen about something that was very dangerous. There was a rather unusual figure that deviated from the norm, and when the employee told this to the commander, he was very surprised. Hanji became worried and started yelling, saying that this could only mean that the gate was about to appear. He started yelling at the workers, asking what they had been doing all this time, why they weren't watching the indicators. The man immediately started looking at the screen, saying that he was actually fine there until the program recorded an error. The commander told them to quickly turn on the cameras at the station in Seoul and asked who among the awakened were nearby. The workers immediately began to search for various information. Then they put it on the screen and reported that the awakened level Sun Jiangsu was living near that place. The commander ordered them to contact him now, for he was to be part of this mission. He then asked what the current gate level was. In fact, the indicators were quite high. At this moment, Hanji thought about the fact that if the gate wasn't cleaned up, the energy release might even cause an explosion. Its power depended on his brother's level and the speed of their development. And a soul gate explosion could not only destroy the main gate but also block traffic on lines 1 and 2 at the airport and en route. And if it's a high-level gate, the Enterprise and the crowded places nearby will become nothing but mountains of ash. Nothing will be left of them. One of the workers said the appearance of the gate has affected homeless people who are at the station in Seoul, subway workers, and even passers-by. The other looked at his screen and replied that there were 4 minutes left until the awakened Song Chansu arrived. However, at that moment, everyone suddenly stopped, and another worker turned to the leader, saying that the gate had opened. And at this point, all the people who were in the train station were still in that obscure place, and the unknown man said he was the mission coordinator. In fact, the number of participants at that time was 214. People started to get worried. They were screaming to be let out because they refused to take part in all this. The mission coordinator said they had to band together to hold the place for 7 days. Then he started scanning the system, and after the scan was complete, they started having a lot of different notifications. All of the attendees present began to be scanned, and once this action was complete, there were many possibilities. At this point, one of the homeless said that since the formation of the special organization, there had not yet been a case of ordinary people being pulled into the gate. And at that moment, He saw various status windows begin to appear. He walked closer to them to study them. On the main window itself, his name, Kim In Chan, popped up, and the fact that he was currently at the first level. After that was a list of his skills, health, resistance, everything was at a very low level. Then another window popped up, saying that no base items were found, no acquired skills either, and no defense runes either. Kim Ying, scrutinizing it, thought that the stats were only slightly higher than the stats of an average person. Jin Yu, who also had special windows popping up for him to examine his skills, was shocked, for they were different from others. The man immediately turned to the purple-haired man, saying that he actually had one question for him. All the people were shocked that he would dare to address the mission coordinators like that. Jin Yu already wanted to ask something about the gate, but the homeless people immediately ran to him, covering his mouth and telling him to be quiet. One of the guys explained that if he pissed him off, they wouldn't live. He asked irritably if he seriously didn't know even such basic things. Jin Yu wasn't going to listen to them. He turned to the man who kept flying in the air, calling him a loon, and asked if he hadn't gotten far. Let him come down now. They wouldn't have an equal conversation. The mission coordinator, of course, wasn't going to listen. He told the men that they had 10 minutes, so they should choose the item they wanted from the inventory. And before he left, he said that in 30 minutes the attack would begin, so they should pray that God would give them a chance, at least in this world, to survive. When the unknown man disappeared, people immediately exhaled in relief. However, at this moment, one of the men turned to Jin Yu, saying that if he wanted to die, let him do it himself. They were pulling everyone with them. Suddenly, their arguments were interrupted by notifications. Pop-ups started appearing in front of them. People immediately realized that it was an inventory, and they had to do what the mission coordinator said. Jin Yu immediately turned to his window, and a notification from the system popped up. It told him to select the weapon he would use in the battle, and if he can't do it within 10 minutes, he just doesn't get anything. Jin Yu didn't even bother to sort out and read these notifications. He immediately waved his hand without realizing what it was. The people around him had already picked out their weapons. At this point, a notification popped up to the guy that he had given up his choice of weapon. At this point, the guys came up to him. One of them asked him why he was interacting with the supervisor like that. If he didn't follow the rules, he would just die. Jin Yu looked at him in surprise, and then replied that he didn't really want anything like that. It was just something he needed to ask him. Then the man said that he was really crazy. Then he grabbed him by the arm and told him to follow him. Jin Yu obeyed. However, he asked why he was pulling him somewhere. However, the homeless man told him to stay close to him, because that was the only way he could survive. His friend turned to the man, asking if he was sure he could protect him. After all, it would be much more difficult than acting alone. In Chang looked at him indignantly and asked if he was suggesting to leave this boy to die, since he didn't even realize what was going on. Jin Yu took his hand away from him, saying that of course he would be safest next to him, and he didn't have to worry because the guy would be able to protect him from everything. The man looked at him in surprise and said that he must have lost his mind after all. Then he asked where his weapon was. Jin Yu calmly replied that he didn't take it. After all, he didn't need it. He could handle it himself. Ying Chan held out his weapon to him, saying that it was a telescopic baton, so he could take it. The guy started to say that he didn't need it at all. However, the man insisted. At this moment, someone's voice suddenly sounded, saying that the first battle would soon begin. Ying Chang irritatedly shouted at the guy, telling him to suck it up as soon as possible, because it would be a while before he could go into battle. Jin Yu looked around. In fact, he could sense the energy of about 500 people. However, he then took a closer look and realized that these were creatures weighing in at over 200 gynes. Their numbers, mass, and the speed of these creatures surpassed humans. The people who had already noticed too were scared. Some started to run away. In Chang got into a fighting stance and thought, is it really a chimpanzee? However, his partner told him to look at its size in general, because it would be even more than 3 meters tall. However, the other guys were more optimistic. One of them said that it was an ordinary monkey and they could easily handle it. Some people started to strategize something because of how they would go into battle. and Jin Yu stood there and only thought about the fact that the monster's muscles were superior to human muscles. How could they destroy them? However, at that moment, the guy went straight ahead. The man at your side noticed this and asked where he was going. He tried to stop him, telling him not to leave this circle as it might be too dangerous. However, Jin Yu certainly didn't listen to them. The rest of the guys were holding the man back from going after him because they didn't need any more casualties. Jin Yu didn't pay attention to their shouts. He simply walked straight towards his enemies, and then he activated his abilities. At this moment, he thought that it would still be necessary to teach these brutes the doctrines of the heavenly palace. And at that moment, the monkeys immediately attacked him, trying to kill him. The people who were watching all this were shocked. They thought that this was the end of the guy. The monster already wanted to switch to the other players as well. However, at that moment, something strange happened. Jin Yu was able to beat them and divert their attention. At this moment, he ran away from the place where the monkeys attacked him for the first time. The man walked on the heads of the monsters and said that the first sensation of the heavenly demon palace was heavenly demon worship. After that, he jumped over, saying that he had roughly estimated their physical abilities, so it would be a little easier for him. Jin Yu then took a glance at the monsters and said that he would now test their endurance with a whip punishment. The monsters, of course, didn't understand a word of it. However, they were terrified, because the guy ran straight at them, using his superpowers. And at that moment, he cut one of the gorillas in half. All the others stood a little farther away and watched. Jin Yu immediately started receiving notifications from the system that he was leveling up, as well as the first-time awakened leveler's defense system had been activated. The system also said that from the next level up, stopping time to protect the awakened would not function. Jin Yu, of course, did not read these notifications. Suddenly he looked around, not understanding why all the monsters suddenly stopped and didn't move. At that moment, a new notification came in. It told him to allocate 10 points to his stats. If he didn't do it in 10 minutes, the points would be allocated selectively. Jin Yu clicked on something in surprise, not realizing what he should do. Suddenly, many different scanning error notifications started coming in. The system was saying that it was impossible to change the object's abilities, and the scan was incomplete for some unknown reason. The system needed a reboot, so things could get back to normal. When the system was rebooted, everything went back to normal. Some scores were unknown, and some were at a low level. He received a notification that the user had not made a selection, so 10 points were randomly distributed. Jin Yu at this moment suddenly flew up into the air. He had some kind of energy he had never known before. At that moment, he realized that this was the same awakening that those guys were talking about. The strength itself was increasing. The guy guessed that if you kill the monster inside the gate with an awakened one called the system, you can be awakened, and as you level up, you get stronger. Jin Yu thought at this moment that this was a pretty good system. However, he didn't need all of this, and at this moment, he activated his abilities. After all, his power is not so simple, and he can only awaken himself. No system will help it. However, he figured it wasn't so bad. Their energy was pure, now he could use it. It would help him. Jin Yu used his abilities to create a glowing ball in his hand, filled with very strong energy. However, at that very moment he received a notification that an error had been detected. He thought about not having the system reject it, because it would help him. The orb grew larger and larger, and he said that if she entered his territory, she couldn't escape. A new notification came in saying that due to an unknown error the stats were not allocated, there was a system crash. It was because of this that the user's level reverted back to the very initial level, and the first-time awakened leveler's defense system was turned off, and the effect of stopping time was removed. So at that very second, the monkeys resumed their move again and immediately started attacking the guy. Jin Yu was of course prepared for this, so he immediately started killing them one by one, with absolutely no effort at all. There were many notifications that the level had risen again. However, because Jin Yu was using his strength, there was a glitch again, and he returned to the first one. Jin Yu was very happy about this. He thought that for killing just 4 creatures, he was getting as much energy as he would have accumulated himself for half a year. The monkeys had already decided not to attack him. They realized that he was calmly handling them, so when Jin Yu ran at them to kill the creatures, they immediately started running away from him. People who were standing on the sidelines and didn't even lift a finger to avoid getting hot-handed watched it all in shock. The system itself was shocked, as the player was able to single-handedly take down 100 members of the Nuka tribe. At that time, a notification occurred that a rune for the player had been activated, namely the Nuka tribe's Nightmare Defense. The normal level in a battle with them, the player's stats would be increased by 30%. These achievements will only be awarded to one player. Defense runes can be set to duplicate up to 10 uses, and it is up to the player to use their powers or not. Jin Yu scrutinized the conditions carefully. At that time, a notice came to him whether or not he would be taking damage defense. However, the guy said that he didn't need it, and meanwhile, he calmly pursued the monsters. However, at that moment, several question windows jumped out to him again. This made him very angry. He immediately brushed off all those pop-ups with his hand and said he wasn't going to use it. He was very annoyed that for every achievement he got a notification and distracted him. The system said at the time that the player had shown incredible humility, and it was amazed at such care. Due to his actions, the survival rate of humanity has increased. And because of the player's modesty, the rune of the first achievement will be given to the player automatically. Jin Yu then became even more angry. He started yelling, asking what the speed had to do with anything. He just didn't really need it. He was doing fine on his own. However, at this moment, another notification came in that all of the player's experience points would increase by 30%. Jin Yu immediately calmed down and said that he needed it. Let the strength from his method accumulate better. The guy received a protective rune. However, at that moment, he heard the screams of the people who were standing nearby. Jin Yu heard their words. Someone was shouting that he was incredibly strong, and now they would be able to survive thanks to him. One of the guys said that it was such a relief to have an awakened one among them. However, at that moment, someone disagreed with them. The man said that if he cleansed everything himself, they would not be able to awaken even while in the gate. They need to do this to get rich. Other people, however, doubted and asked if they were strong enough for this, if they could handle all those monsters. When one of the homeless men saw that the guys wanted to go into battle, he tried to stop them, saying that it was certain death. They couldn't handle these creatures. The guy turned to him, drawing his weapon, and said, "Kiki me, stop them, kid. Apparently it's not easy on his own, so they just want to help him." He then turned to the crowd and asked if anyone wanted to join them. Some agreed, but some would not move from their seats for any reason. When Jin Yu was approached by Ying Chang, who also wanted to awaken, the guy turned to him and said that he had said he would save him after all, so there was no need to even worry here. Ying Chan didn't say anything. He just asked him how old he was. The guy replied that he had already told him that he stopped counting after 100, so he didn't even know. The guy asked if he was the Prince of Korea. Jin Yu replied calmly that of course he was. Ying Chan was actually surprised that with such a mental state, he possessed such incredible strength. He thought that maybe his mind had just been shaken upon awakening. Jin Yu suddenly said that all this running around made him hungry. Then he said that food and other survival items were in his inventory. But then suddenly the rest of the people came up to them, and one of them asked what they should do now. Jin Yu looked at him and said that he didn't know, and wondered why they were suddenly asking him, and then added that he would be catching the doshirak himself, so they might as well not worry. However, the guys didn't know what he was talking about and asked what he meant. Jin Yu calmly said that he meant monsters, and at that moment someone suddenly raised his hand from the crowd. It was a guy. He was an employee of the second station in Seoul. He said that that was why he was roughly familiar with the order of operations at the gate. He said that almost all of the people present were civilians, and asked if it would be better if the mission was led by an awakened person. Jin Yu was surprised to hear this, and said that he was not an awakened person at all. The employee was surprised and asked if he wasn't from the organization. The guy said he was not awakened, and asked if he had heard anything about martial arts. Ying Chan said in a muffled voice to eventually pay attention, because their corpse was a little sick in the head. Jin Yu, hearing these words, immediately turned around to him and asked him what he was saying, what was wrong with his head. Does he still not believe him? The guy asked, "What would you?" he said, "because it's not like that," and also asked how he even got to them from his country. Jin Yu said, shouting out that he actually created the gate. Chan said in a mocking voice that it all made sense to him now and asked if he did it himself. That's very cool and deserves respect. Jin Yu got angry and said that he would at least pretend to believe, but then he couldn't stand it and pointed his finger at some guy who was standing nearby, and he said that he would be the one in charge now. The boy got nervous and asked why he was suddenly in charge. Jin Yu wasn't going to explain anything to him. He said that the guy had heard everything. He had no choice since he was the only awakened one in this place. Everyone present immediately turned around to look at this guy. They were surprised, for they did not know about it. The guy stood there in shock for a while, and then got angry and asked how he even realized it. His eyes suddenly took on a different color. Jin Yu was completely calm. He said that he actually just felt the energy flowing in his body, even though he could see everything in his eyes. The guy calmed down a bit and then said that since that was the case, who was he more outstanding than he thought? However, he gave his name, namely Kang Se-ren, and said that he was indeed an awakened one. However, as a Chinese, he is a member of the organization, and according to convention, he has no right to operate within the gates of another country. Jin Yu walked over to him and grabbed his shoulder with a firm grip, telling him to do as he was told. He activated a superpower there so that his shoulder began to heat up, and laughing, said that if he refused, he would die. He also asked, "Is this convention more expensive than his own life?" Jin Yu said angrily that he was in charge now, and let him do something about all these people already. At this moment, he thought that even though it was said that there were many strong beings in the world, but how many of them could handle an entire Nuka tribe with the same ease? Jin Yu thought that judging from his strength, he was a high-level ranker who should be in the top 200. However, he didn't understand why no one would know about him. Is he really a tough ranker here who changed his appearance? He looked him straight in the eyes and asked why he was silent. Then Kang Zi lowered his head and said that if there were no more awakened ones in this place, then he would agree, and he would save the people first. Jin Yu then took his hand away and started to walk away, saying that it was all fine. It would be him who would fight anyway, and let the guy take care of the others. Kenzie replied that he would do that, and also said that as the guy already knows, his level E gate on the second day, the monsters start attacking everyone indiscriminately. Jin Yu was surprised and asked what that meant. Kenzie wondered if he really didn't know. I then explained that this coordinator called himself One Tse, and his name contains information about the gate. The first letter denotes the strength of the monsters. If the rank was even a little lower, even those dead people would be able to deal with the monster and awaken. The middle number indicates the type of mission: guard, attack, or raid. In their case, the number 1 is guard. The last letter indicates the difficulty of the gate and is determined by the number of participants. The fewer the number of participants, the higher the level. If this leader has the last letter T's, then the level of difficulty is equal for the number of participants. Then he asked if the guy understood everything. Jin Yu yawned and said that he had figured it all out. At this moment, the awakened man wondered if he really didn't know anything, or if he was just pretending to be cool. After that, he inquired about his name. Jin Yu, of course, called out to him, "You came out with the name Wang Jiyu." Kenzie said that this was the first day, so the monsters would only attack the first attacker, which was him. However, the next day, absolutely anyone could be targeted. In such a case, already absolutely no one will not be able to avoid this battle, even the simplest people, because the monsters will not sort out who. Paris said he'd take command and try to hold out, so he'd have to deal with those monsters as fast as he could at all. Jin Yu said he understood and added that he didn't see a better option. And then he asked about the level. Does it go up with the killing of every third or fourth monster? Kenzie said that it actually depends on the monster itself. Chang, watching all this, thought that the guy was explaining it well enough. Kenzie also added that in fact, as you level up, experience points also change exponentially. The boy, hearing this, immediately thought about it. But Ken Z didn't understand why he kept asking about all this in the first place. He really didn't know anything, or there was some other reason. But then suddenly other people approached the awakened guy and asked him how difficult the D level was. The guy replied that he could say it was very difficult. At this moment, he glimpsed a glimpse of Jin Yu, thinking about the fact that a sweep by two awakened people was impossible. And even if he showed incredible strength and killed everyone, most of the civilians would still die. Several days had passed since that moment. Almost every news station in the country was reporting that it had been 5 days since the gate had appeared at the Seoul station, which was a logistics center. A state of emergency was declared, and scientists had always predicted the appearance of gates using the number of anomalies. However, they failed to record these, and this was the first time they had such a case. Some people were interviewed. One of the scientists said that according to the organization's official statement, this is a level D gate, and all participants are civilians. The man sitting next to him, who was doing this very interview, asked what about their numbers. The scientist replied that they don't know how many homeless people there were, so it's hard to give an exact figure.